The 100 Years' War, 1337 to 1453 AD. The Crown, the Blood, and the Destiny of Nations. It began with a question of inheritance and ended with the birth of nations. For over a century, England and France, two of the most powerful kingdoms in medieval Europe, were locked in a war that would define their destinies. It was not one war, but a series of them, fought by kings and knights, peasants and saints. It gave the world legends like Joan of Arc, Edward the Black Prince, and the rise of national identity itself. This is the true story of the 100 Years' War, a struggle that began over a throne and ended by forging the modern world. Chapter 1. The Spark. A Crown in Dispute, 1328-1337. The story begins with a death. In 1328, the King of France, Charles IV, died without a male heir. The direct line of France's royal family, the Capetians, was broken. By ancient law, the French crown could pass only through male lineage, a principle known as the Salic law. But there was a problem. Charles's sister, Isabella of France, was the mother of Edward III, the young King of England. By blood, Edward was the closest male relative. By law, the French said he had no claim, because inheritance could not pass through a woman. Instead, the French nobles chose Philip Seguier, a cousin from another branch of the royal family, the House of Valois. Edward III accepted this, at first, but when Philip began seizing English territories in France, everything changed. Chapter 2. The Road to War, 1337. At that time, England still owned large lands in France, especially Gascony, rich in wine, trade, and pride. Philip the Phoenix declared that Gascony should belong to France. In retaliation, Edward III claimed the French crown itself, declaring himself rightful king of both England and France. The year was 1337. Two nations prepared for war, a war that would last 116 years. Chapter 3. The First Phase, the English Triumphs, in 1337 to 1360. The early years belonged to the English. The Battle of Crécy, 1346. In 1346, Edward III invaded Normandy with a modern army, smaller than the French, but far deadlier. At Crécy, the French knights charged uphill in waves, glittering in armor, confident of victory. But the English had something new: the longbow, 6-foot bows of yew, firing arrows that could pierce armor from 250 meters. The rain of arrows cut down the knights like wheat before a scythe. When the battle ended, 10,000 Frenchmen lay dead, including most of their nobility. The age of chivalry had met its end. Edward's son, Edward the Black Prince, earned his name that day. His armor black, his tactics ruthless, his legend born. The Siege of Calais, 1347. After Crécy, the English besieged Calais for nearly a year. When the city finally fell, Edward spared its people only after 6 citizens offered their lives in surrender, the famous burghers of Calais. Their sacrifice moved even the king. Calais became England's foothold on the continent for 200 years, the Black Death. Then, in 1347, a darker enemy arrived. The Black Death swept across Europe, plague carried by fleas on rats, killing 1/3 of the population. War paused as both nations buried their dead, but when the plague passed, bloodshed returned. Chapter 4. The Black Prince in the Golden Age of England, 1355-1360. Edward the Black Prince led a new campaign into southern France, swift, brutal, and brilliant. His troops burned fields, plundered towns, and avoided pitched battles unless they could win decisively. It was called chevauchée, war as terror. The Battle of Poitiers, 1356. At Poitiers, the Black Prince faced King John II of France, known as John the Good. The French had twice the numbers, but Edward's longbowmen and tactics crushed them again. John himself was captured, taken to London in chains. France fell into chaos. By the Treaty of Bretigny, 1360, England gained vast territories in western France, and John's ransom was set at 3 million gold coins. For a moment, England seemed unstoppable, but glory never lasts. Chapter 5. The French Revival, 1369–1389. When Charles V became King of France in 1364, everything changed. He was cautious, patient, and brilliant, the opposite of his father John. He rebuilt the army, fortified cities, and relied on a genius general, Bertrand du Guesclin. Instead of meeting the English in open battle, du Guesclin used guerrilla tactics, striking supply lines, avoiding the longbow's range, and reclaiming land piece by piece. By 1380, the Black Prince was dead, Edward III was dying, and most English gains in France were lost. The tide had turned. For the first time in decades, peace returned, but it was fragile. Chapter 6. The Madness of Kings, E1399–1415. The next phase of war began with instability and insanity. In France, King Charles V, known as Charles the Mad, suffered from violent delusions, attacking his own men and believing he was made of glass. His court divided into factions, the Armagnacs and Burgundians, who fought each other more than the English. In England, King Richard II was overthrown by his cousin Henry IV, whose claim to the throne was weak. His son, Henry V, would change that. Chapter 7. The Second English Invasion, Henry V and Agincourt, 1415. In 1415, King Henry V invaded France, claiming to restore his rightful inheritance. France was divided, leaderless, and weak. The campaign culminated in the Battle of Agincourt, one of the most famous victories in English history. The Battle of Agincourt, 1415. On October 25th, St. Crispin's Day, 6,000 Englishmen faced over 20,000 French knights. The battlefield was a muddy field, hemmed in by woods. When the French charged, their armor sank into the muck. The English longbowmen unleashed storm after storm of arrows. The French were slaughtered. Over 7,000 died. Nobles, dukes, counts. Henry's army lost fewer than 400. Shakespeare would later immortalize the king's speech. "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers." Henry marched on, capturing Normandy and besieging Rouen. In 1420, he forced France to sign the Treaty of Troyes. He married Catherine of Valois, daughter of the French king, and was declared heir to the French throne. It seemed England had finally won, but fate had one more twist. Chapter 8. The Girl Who Saw Angels, Joan of Arc, 1429–1431. By 1429, France was near collapse. Its young heir, Charles VII, had been disinherited by the Treaty of Troyes. The English occupied Paris and most of northern France. Only the southern city of Orléans held out. Then came a miracle. A teenage peasant girl from Domremy claimed that God had spoken to her, commanding her to drive the English out and crown Charles as king. Her name was Jeanne d'Arc, Joan of Arc. She wore armor, carried a banner, and inspired soldiers and civilians alike. Under her guidance, French morale soared. At Orléans, her presence alone turned despair into victory. The siege was lifted. In 1429, she led Charles to Reims, where he was crowned King of France. For the first time in a generation, France believed again. But her triumph was brief. In 1430, Joan was captured by the Burgundians and sold to the English. They charged her with witchcraft and heresy. At 19, she was burned at the stake in Rouen. Witnesses said her heart would not burn. A martyr was born, and a nation with her. Chapter 9. The Fall of English Power, 1431–1453. After Joan's death, France rose like a phoenix. Under Charles VII, the army was reformed, better armed, better trained, better led. The French artillery became the best in Europe, and gunpowder began to replace the bow. One by one, English strongholds fell. In 1450, at the Battle of Formigny, the French used cannon to devastating effect, shattering English lines. In 1453, at the Battle of Castillon, the last English army in France was destroyed. Their commander, John Talbot, the English Achilles, was killed in action. After 116 years, the 100 Years' War was over. England lost everything in France, except Calais. France was united, triumphant, and reborn. The age of chivalry had ended, and the age of nations had begun. Chapter 10. The Legacy of the 100 Years' War. The war changed more than borders. It changed identity. England and France were no longer feudal kingdoms. They became nations. Kings were now national leaders, not just feudal lords. Commoners, who once fought for nobles, began fighting for country. The English longbow gave way to the gun. The knight, once invincible, was replaced by the soldier. And the voices of the people began to shape destiny, from Joan's cries of faith to the peasant rebellions born of hardship. When it ended, both nations stood forever changed. England turned inward, facing civil war, the Wars of the Roses. France became the most powerful kingdom in Europe. From the ashes of medieval warfare rose the modern world. Chapter 11. Epilogue. The end of an age. They fought for crowns, but forged countries. They waged war for kings, but gave birth to nations. The 100 Years' War was not just a conflict. It was a transformation. From Crécy to Castillon, from Edward III to Joan of Arc, it was a saga of ambition, courage, betrayal, and faith. The blood spilled on those battlefields became the foundation of England and France as we know them today. The war ended, but its echoes never died. And in the ashes of that long struggle, the medieval world gave way to the dawn of a new age, the Renaissance, the nation-state, and the modern mind.